Seeing no further public comments, we'll return it now for board discussion. I had a few questions for the registrar and for our county council. Neil, let's start with you. If you'd return here, and I'm sure there's some other questions as well for you among my colleagues. I know in this election, literally every vote counts. I mean, that's a cliche in every election, but this one, certainly the last one did. And there's been a lot of discussion about voter intent as opposed to disqualifying marks. And I know you had to weigh both because the law says you've got to infer voter intent, but there are certain things that are presumptively disqualifying. How did you balance that in looking at each one of these ballots?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
How do you know which trumps which?
Sure. It is a difficult process, and the best way to describe it is that any identifying marks that are on the ballots, for example, initials, names, we had a grocery list from a past election, something that identifies that ballot or could potentially identify that ballot, then becomes disqualifying under the election code and the vote counting standards set by the Secretary of State. So that's how we went through that process.
We've heard about the Secretary of State guidelines. Are these guidelines the same as law, or these are the Secretary of State's interpretation of law set down by the legislature, or does the Secretary of State himself or herself have the power to promulgate guidelines which in fact are the same as law?
There are guidelines, I'm for part of this county council, there are guidelines that are set by the Secretary of State that are interpretations of the laws, and there, in addition to that, there are regulations set by the Secretary of State. In the guidelines themselves, they identify those election code sections that are applicable within those guidelines. And beyond that, I defer to county council.
All right. Stay where you are if you would, but I had a couple of questions for our county council, Ben DeMaio. Ben, what does the law say about our obligation to certify and what our leeway is in terms of when we do it?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Actually, the statute provides, the elections code provides that the registrar of voters has to certify the results within 28 days
right.
of the election, which would be by March 6th. The statute does not expressly say when the board has to then declare the winner. But we've always interpreted it within that same time frame.
Mm-hmm.
But actually, the statute, 28 days in the statute, only refers to the registrar of voters certification.
Mm-hmm. And that 28 days would be up when?
March 6th.
March 6th, which is a week from today. So the registrar certifies the results, but only board action can actually declare a winner.
Correct.
And we have 28 days from the election to do that. If a person, whoever is declared the winner by the board, whenever, that person immediately vacates any political office they currently have, correct?
The incompatibility of offices doctrine, it would probably depend on the office, but I would say city council and school board member, which are the two offices we're talking about here that the two leading candidates hold, those would be incompatible with being a member of the Board of Supervisors. And under that doctrine, a person would forfeit that office. Again, since those are offices that our office doesn't represent, the city attorney or the attorney for the school board would be the ultimate decider whether or not what that person's status is. But the incompatibility of office doctrine does state that the person forfeits their office upon assuming a second office.
So had we, for example, declared Trung the winner after the first certification, he would have lost that office immediately as a Garden Grove school board member.
Yes, sir.
And if we swore Janet in today, she would immediately be off the Garden Grove City Council and would not be able to participate in tonight's Garden Grove City Council meeting.
Yes, sir.
Is that correct? And then if later other actions judicially or otherwise overturned that result, they would not be able to reclaim that seat. Is that correct?
Again, there aren't any cases that we could find in the short time available to address that particular question. Again, it would be something the city council, the city attorney would have to address, but I think there's a substantial risk that, again, once that office is forfeited, it is forfeited.
Right.
And the person can't resume the other seat.
Okay. Thank you, Ben. More questions. John Moorlach, my colleague, Supervisor Moorlach.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to just say a few things, but Neil, I have a question for you. The first is I want to just thank all the candidates that ran for this seat. I want to congratulate Janet Nguyen and Nguyen for a long battle and a long journey here. We had to wait quite some time just to hold the election with the ballot counting of the Korea Dowsher race. So this has been an extremely long, arduous process, and I don't envy either one of you having to jump into this office immediately without much lead time. So I wanted to ask you, well, first I'd also want to say that both the candidates are represented with excellent counsel and supporters, and they've brought a lot of concerns to our attention these last few minutes, literally, Neil. But when is the recount officially completed?
Last night at about 8 o'clock, Supervisors, through the chair, I signed the documents, so last evening at 8 o'clock.
Okay, so if someone wanted to file a protest, they have how much time to do that?
Again, I defer to County Council on that.
An election contest. I don't have that immediately available at all.
Can I direct you, counsel,
You
to
probably have it right there, Supervisor.
section 15623 of the Elections Code, if you wouldn't mind?
Right. Anytime during the conduct of a recount and for 24 hours thereafter, any other voter may request a recount of any precincts in an election for the same office.
So then technically until 8 p.m. tonight, any voter in the first district could approach Mr. Kelly and ask for another recount or some other ministerial function. So are we, according to this code section, are we a day premature in this process?
I'm not sure if I'm not sure we've really addressed that particular provision and whether that applies here. And I know.
Were you looking for some other staff help, Ben? No?
I'm looking for staff to help.
Just, you know who you're looking for.
There wasn't rated in Mr. Schroeder's letter, so I had to research it.
Well, we've spent some time, Mr. Chair, going through some of these code sections because we're getting calls from both sides. And
We're getting a lot of calls.
15623, 15627, I've printed them out, and I'm sitting here very uncomfortable to approve the certification today. I mean, if you want to adjourn the meeting until 8:01 tonight, and then I can vote. But voting now, under my understanding of this code provision, I'm a little. In fact, I just find that would be imprudent to do. So that's pretty much where I'm at, Mr. Chair.
All right. Now, was that a statement, or do you still have a question?
Well, I see council has arrived, so I'll see if I understand this code provision properly.
All right.
Chairman Norby, members of the board, Leon Page, Deputy County Counsel. Looking at this provision of the Elections Code, it specifically relates to precincts not counted. It's not an opportunity to conduct another recount. It simply relates to those precincts that were not counted as a result of the original request. And we would take the position that all precincts were counted. So this provision would not apply.
Mr. Chair, I have heard the opposite from testimony this morning, that not all the ballots were counted. At least they were counted maybe electronically, but not all of them were counted that were hand voted. So I'm getting a little confused. Mr. Kelly?
I would agree, obviously, with council. We did complete the recount based on advice from council yesterday, and all of the precincts and all of the ballots were recounted. I know there's dispute whether they should have been on VVPAT versus electronic, but the answer to your question, sir, is that all of the precincts were recounted.
Mm-hmm. All right.
Thank you.
Any more?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We're going to have a little fun with
Good.
County
Well, you'll
Council.
stick around.